I'm here today with Michael from Kodiak, and we will have a conversation about the benefits of autonomous trucking. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
You guys announced some really big news during CES. Kodiak with the first driverless autonomous trucking platform. Really exciting. When do you actually take the driver out of the truck?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for having me. And before I answer it, I think let's actually talk about the platform just for a second, right? So it's the first driverless ready truck. What does that mean? It means it has all the redundancy for actually allowing driverless operations. That means braking, steering, compute, as well as power. And we are the first company to actually have that on the road. So the hardware is ready. Now, there's still some more work to do on the software side, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, when you decide to go driverless, you are working towards what is called a safety case. It's basically a risk analysis, taking, on-road data, simulation data, scenario databases, and so on. And you really make that claim of saying, okay, we are proving to ourselves that our system is as safe or safer than the average human driver. So we currently are working on that. And later in 2024, we will actually do the first driverless runs. Those are, between Dallas and Houston, which is our first lane, and those are internal runs. And then beginning of 2025, we will do the first driverless commercial runs.
Very interesting. You mentioned you can be safer than a human driver. How do you actually prove that? Like, what is the measurement? Because there's been a lot of scrutiny in recent months on the safety of AVs.
Yep.
How do you kind of support that claim?
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of data that you're going to use, right? And we all know what the statistics are on how many accidents, how many fatal accidents, how many just property accidents, and so on. So you have a baseline. And then, of course, you need to come up with the data from simulation, as I mentioned, as well as on-road data, and say, okay, with the data that we have, we're going to prove that we are safer. Now, important is when you think about the human driver versus the autonomous driver or the virtual driver. The virtual driver, of course, needs to be able to do all the same things, right? Mm-hmm. Follow the rules of the road, just like the human driver does.
No speeding.
No speeding, of course. But in addition, what a virtual driver, the benefit it has, it's actually constantly monitoring, right? If you think about a human truck driver, it's the Smith system, and they basically have to look at, the mirrors, back mirrors, and everything, and so on. And basically, it takes several seconds to scan the environment. But an autonomous truck, it scans the environment consistently, right? All the time, 360 degrees. So you actually have, at any given point of time, a more accurate picture of the environment than a human driver has. In addition, you never get distracted, right? That system doesn't drink, it doesn't get drowsy, doesn't get tired, it never gets distracted. The other thing, I think what many people don't talk so much about is when you think about environments, let's call it fog, let's call it heavy rain, and so on. Human drivers very often drive when they maybe shouldn't drive or should drive slower. I don't know if you're slowing down when it's, rainy, but the autonomous truck will basically say, okay, how far do I see reliably? And then say, well, I'm maybe not seeing far enough reliably in order to operate 65 miles per hour. So I'm going to slow down to 60, 55, 50, right? And so that system constantly does that evaluation, and it fundamentally makes it safer than a human driver.
Makes sense. So safety, very strong and clear benefit, but there's also a real business case, right, for autonomous trucking. So for fleet operators, how would you articulate those benefits?
Yeah, they are huge, first of all. So, in the early days of autonomy, people would just say, well, you take out the driver, you save the driver cost, right? Obviously, that's not really true. That is just like half the story, because first of all, the autonomy costs something, the virtual driver, the hardware as well as the software. But we actually approach this very differently. We actually look at this from a TCO perspective and work together with carriers to do that. Because if you think about a human-driven truck, currently does roughly 100,000 miles a year, and mostly limited because drivers' hours of service, right? Now you look at an autonomous truck, well, it can operate 250, 300,000 miles a year, right? So there's just a huge upside possible from a revenue perspective. Then in addition, that revenue and those miles that you're driving can actually be driven in a more efficient way. What do I mean by that? Is first of all, there might be fuel savings, or there will be fuel savings because of driving a little bit smoother, maybe driving a little bit slower in some environments. But also more importantly, what I think many actually not always talking about is if you think about the out of route miles, deadhead miles that are currently driven in the industry and you take away some of those, right? Those are not like small numbers. Those are between 10 and 15% each. If you take away some of those, you have actually saved a lot of inefficient miles, can turn them into efficient miles, and again, generate more revenue, right? In addition, and those are also fuel savings, right? Meaning also sustainability effects, carbon emission reduction, and so on.
Yep.
In addition, if you think about a human truck, what they do is they actually idle quite a bit. If you think, and there are stats out there that the average Class 8 truck idles and it uses 1,500 gallons per year just for idling, meaning keeping the cab warm, keeping the cab cool. Well, without a driver, we don't need to keep the cab warm, keep the cab cool. Just reducing that, huge cost benefit, huge sustainability benefit, right? So you really have to take all of those into account. And then, of course, one of the core benefits that also comes in addition to that is safety, right? Once we are able to prove what that is in the long run, how the accident rates will be reduced, how repair costs and so on can be reduced, additional benefits. So you take all of that additional revenue, lower cost, more efficient or better utilization on the kind of rate per mile that you are getting, and you have a huge TCO advantage for carriers and fleets.
You make a really strong case. One last question. A lot of the testing has been on highways. When the truck gets off the highway, what actually happens? Are you able to operate in an urban environment as well?
So we are currently not focusing on doing urban environment, but of course you need to get somewhere where the truck can what we call land, right? Yep. So you will have designated areas where the truck is going to launch from and land at. Now, those do not need to be, huge infrastructure and whatever. We really work with several partners on actually saying, okay, what are the right facilities which are close to the highway, easy to approach with our autonomy system, and say, okay, we're building this network of these launch and landing hubs. We at Kodiak actually call them truck ports. And so basically from those, the autonomy will be able to handle from there, and to there, the autonomy will be able to handle.
Awesome. Look forward to seeing the first driverless ride in the near future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it.